Today, I am thrilled to have Ben and Chris Blaine with me, otherwise known as the Blaine Brothers. So they are fabulous filmmakers with tons of expertise in directing comedy, which I'm very excited to dig into. But before we dive in, is there anything else that we should know about you and your work and connections to comedy?
I don't think so, particularly, Chris. What do you think? Kind of, we make more than comedy, I suppose, is sort of the first thing to flag.
Yeah.
That kind of, we started out being silly, and I think that we do have a kind of natural tendency, particularly kind of, we make each other laugh, and we are quite silly. So that is often, I think that's always there in our work. But one of the problems actually that we sort of had over the years, we started out making short films, and I don't know if you've ever been to a short film screening, but yeah, they're painful, aren't they? So after kind of, sitting through a couple of these where you sort of go for kind of an hour and they sort of squat, you don't do this to normal films. You don't sort of, force people to watch 7 films on a trot, but because they're only kind of 10 minutes, is all kind of like cram them all together. But they're all really intense. And so you'd sit there watching kind of like, a film about how awful war is, followed by a film about child abuse, followed by a film about how awful racism is. And it would just be really kind of like, oh God, I just can't breathe. And so we always liked then kind of popping up with something that was silly. And often we would use our silliness to hide, deeper, significant, powerful meanings. And sometimes we'd just be silly. We very much started out enjoying giving the audience a breather from trauma. And
then when we were doing longer stuff, we wanted to give people trauma.
Basically.
Yeah. Fair.
Yeah. But yeah. So yeah, and we found kind of like, at the same time as doing the shorts, we were writing it's like we often struggled, I think, to kind of really do justice to the big kind of messy, more serious thoughts that we had in 5 minutes. And I think we watched a lot of short films that equally struggled to do justice to those themes in the space that they allowed themselves.
And a short is great for jokes, going set up, pay off. You're like, yeah, that's a wonderful thing to do in a short space of time. So we've always really enjoyed doing that.
Fabulous. And at what point did directing come into your careers? Was it right from the beginning with the shorts? Or, yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you think people underestimate about directing, particularly comedy?
I think directing is the bit that everybody understands exists in making films, and most other jobs people don't really know they exist. So like you spend most of your time going, actually, there's carpenters over there. There's electricians. A lot of electricians, they get paid better than us actually, and do less hours because they're unionized. And
but it's rare that you sort of fall in love with going to the cinema and sit there being kind of like, I love this movie. I am definitely going to be a key grip. That is me. That is me, a key grip.
Until you meet Phil, and then Phil, he just loves pushing people up and down.
And he's a master at it.
Absolute master at it, exactly. And yeah, so you kind of like, in terms of when you start out, we started out, I'd bought a camera, I wanted to do animation, and Ben had written a script with his mate Keith and was like, do you want to make this over the summer with us? And I did, because animation takes ages. And so we shot a thing. And and you kind of like, when you're making it all yourself, you just think, all right, well then I'm a filmmaker. I guess we kind of always think of ourselves more as filmmakers than directors necessarily, because we write, we direct, we edit. I do lots of VFX, Ben does lots of sound. I love colouring in at the end. And yeah, everything in between. So you're kind of, the first point of call, I think, for most people is director. And then like a lot of what we had to learn was in terms of what the other jobs were and what you're supposed to ask them to do, because you don't know from the outside.
Yeah, and I think also, again, we very much come from a kind of, as Chris says, like as a filmmaker background. And so directing is part of our process in terms of making a film. And that is actually quite there's a difference in that to them being a director on someone else's project and the role, the subtle role of actually just being director, and what you're actually there as the conductor of all of these elements. But when it's not your thing to make, you're not the kind of like the final creative say so on it. And I think, it took us a long time to kind of really see that magic of being in control, but also out of control, but also surprised by what is happening around you in a good way. It's kind of by the people that you're working with answering not in exactly the way that you wanted, but in a way that's better. That I think kind of is probably the thing that took us longest to kind of get round to understanding as directors, isn't it?
Yeah, and enjoying.
Yeah.
But it's the most enjoyable part of the whole process is having everyone chipping in and making the ideas better and coming up with stuff that no one had thought of before, and that expresses the idea better and funnier. And that's definitely the bit that is kind of why you want to keep doing it, really.
Yeah, especially when that's happening live in the moment, so, which is often the hardest thing about it, but the most exciting thing about it is that it's not often a kind of a convenient process. It's not a thing where kind of you gather all the actors and heads of department around the table and you sit down and you discuss how a scene's going to work out, and everyone goes away and thinks about it, and then they kind of come back with their ideas. Like that's not how it is. It's always a chaos of people having inspirations and frustrations, and people going, I can't do this, I don't know what this doesn't work for me, can't say it, don't like this, what is it? And it's sort of when you kind of work through that, and suddenly in the moment it comes together, and you find the thing that does work, and you find the other way through. That's when it's really exciting.
Yeah, and that's the common misconception, I think, as well, that Ben's picked up on in terms of directing, is that sense of everybody knows a director as a filmmaker, and they know it from films, and that's, this person is the auteur, is the only person that counts, and everyone has to do exactly what they say. And then, you get into television and you're kind of like, no, the writer is the more important one than you. And then you get into commercials and you're like, I mean, why are we here? I'm not quite sure. So, you're kind of like, you think that you've got ultimate control, and you walking into a lot of jobs thinking, well, that's what you're going to do. But in reality, you are there to help shepherd other people's ideas. And, that's actually is the most enjoyable part of it. So, it's...
and that's actually the same in film as well. Like I think film still gives more space to directors and more credence to directors. But if you're doing it right, you're still letting other people in. It's kind of like, if you can't do that, it's not going to be as good.
That's brilliant. There's so much to think about there. And one of the high-profile projects that you've been involved with is Sara Pascoe's Out of Her Mind, a series for BBC2 and also Sony TV. And although we are familiar, most people will be familiar with the term director. Actually, I think from the outside, the process is quite opaque with regards to how people actually get asked to do projects and attached to projects. And I'm sure it's different for different things. But for using that as an example, how did you go from whatever you were doing prior to that to actually then being involved with that project? What was that process like?
It's just entirely down to our shining brilliance.
So before Out of Her Mind, we'd just made our feature film Nina Forever. And so we were in quite a different headspace at that point, but we've known Sara for years. In fact, Sarah's first on-screen job, I think her first on-screen appearance is in the back of a Take That interview when she's about 14. But then her first kind of like acting thing was with us in a short film that we made with Film 4 called Hello Panda, where idiots that we are, we gave her a non-speaking part. She was still very funny in it, but looking back, you go, we could have written her up a bit more. We could have given that genius a bit more scope to run with. But so we've known her for years, and she came to us. She initially was commissioned for a comedy short, which was very much kind of like done with the view of selecting scripts that to do a kind of like 15-20 minute pilot with an eye to turning them into a series. And she came to us with her one and said, let's do this together. And I think she wanted people with a film background. She wanted people with an avant-garde background. Our work is not that conventional. And I think she also, there had been plenty of people who she had known who had been given similar opportunities, and in that situation been paired up with kind of more established TV names, and those people weren't necessarily happy with the outcome. And that sense of, which TV can feel like, of kind of dropping into a sausage factory, and kind of like this, particularly as like, I think as a stand-up, even more so than as a avant-garde independent filmmaker. You kind of like, as a stand-up, it's just you. It's kind of like there's no one else that you have to answer to, and it's kind of like, that's very lonely, but it's also very freeing. And I think for anybody moving from that space where you've spent years in complete control of your work, it's just you in direct communication with the audience, moving to television is an incredible shift. And it's incredibly hard, because suddenly you absolutely do have to let all these other voices into the mix. And, that alone, I think, is a big step up. And then everyone comes to that process with their own agendas and egos and ambitions, and I think that Sara was very aware that, creatively we matched, but also she trusted us that we wouldn't come to this project and kind of go, well, what do we get out of it? How do we make this feel like us so that we can move on and do the next thing that's us? Like, how do we use Sara for our benefit? That, she knew that because we're idiots, our only interest was kind of following where she was going creatively and having fun with it, so.
Wonderful. And this is not an easy question, but given if Sarah's a stand-up and has, that live response and is used to that and have been filmed, and you're also having the experience of what's live on set, how do you have any checks and balances that you find really useful for calibrating for the viewer? And the reason that I ask this, and I don't think it's an easy question at all, is I feel like I'm so much more willing to laugh in real life. I laugh at so much stuff that my friends do and like messing around, but the bar's quite low and I'll find it really funny. And then something weird happens as soon as it's on a screen where I don't mean to be mean, but just like my tolerance or how I engage with it, like the bar just goes way up. So I always wonder about that from behind the scenes of how you do it. Because I feel like if I was making something with my friends or people that I knew, I would be so much more willing to laugh in the room than I would as a viewer. So I'm just curious.
Yeah. I mean, wow, that's a huge question. I mean,
I know.
our kind of preferred working method as filmmakers is very audience focused and always has been in different ways. And we, maybe I'll get onto the mobile cinema at another point. But when we made our feature film Nina Forever, we kind of initially thought, well, we'll have we got to a cut that we were happy with, and we thought, well, we'll have a test screening just to kind of check that we're the geniuses that we know that we are. And it was a complete disaster, and it was. Except it wasn't a disaster. It was the best thing that happened to us, because we sat there in the room. And the incredible thing about watching your own work with an audience, is that you can't help but see it through their eyes and feel it through their emotions. And, this was a film that by this point we'd spent, a year, 18 months kind of like playing with and working with. And we knew every frame of it backwards. And then suddenly we were in this room and we were like, what is this? Like Chris turned to me kind of afterwards and was kind of like, I didn't know when it was going to end. I didn't know what, and it was so revelatory because it was so useful, because it was kind of like, the audience say things to you afterwards, like kind of like, oh, it's beautifully shot. Have you thought of cutting it in half? And it doesn't really matter what they say, because you just have this really kind of visceral feeling of kind of like, okay, that doesn't work. That did work. That got me. That I hated. Get rid, change this. And we actually ended up doing, what was it, 5 screenings. And by the last screening, the energy in the room carried us all the way through to the blackout after the last frame and the credits, and you were like, that's the film, like now, like, and you could feel the excitement, and yeah, it was brilliant. But it came through shaping it with the audience. So that was such a kind of learning experience for us, that has absolutely become kind of our ideal way of working. And that was something that we kind of wanted to do with Out of Her Mind. It's very hard to do things like that in television anyway.
And then in the middle of lockdown in pandemic times, it was weirdly hard to get lots of people in the room.
Genuinely illegal.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sadly, that wasn't a process that we got to go through. And I think, like in TV, we would have had to have fought tooth and nail to get that kind of audience access anyway. So without that, you then kind of fall back on the next audience that you have, which is, the audience of the people that you're working with, Goz, the producer, and Sara herself, who, again, kind of like, we were very kind of closely involved in the edit on a day-to-day basis. And then Sara would have distance and, come in and watch it and go, what the fuck have you done? Please go back to how I wrote it. Don't make those changes. And then we discuss that, and, find a happy medium. But yeah, so that was kind of the audience that we ended up sort of, relying on, which is the more normal process, I think, kind of like, the audience of the people that you're working with.
Yeah. But when you're on set, you've obviously got the crew to start off with. You've got us, they genuinely will be laughing at the stuff that we find funny. The takes that you love the most are the ones where people are having to stop themselves from laughing during the take. So, that side of it can be really enjoyable. Like, there's definitely a thing that we're still wrestling with a little bit in terms of crew shows, are a thing where basically you rehearse the scene with the actors before you're going to shoot anything. So you work that out, and you've worked out where you're going to probably be placing the camera. With the DOP, they might have been there as well watching it. And then you bring in the entire crew, and they all watch it one go round. And on the one hand, that's lovely, and it means everybody knows exactly what's happening and exactly what is going on. But sometimes you're sat there going like, yeah, but you've just done the Comedy Genius now, and we haven't filmed it. Everybody's had the camera turned off whilst they're really enjoying the magical thing that you've done, that you won't ever quite do exactly the same again in future takes, and we'll always be sat there going like, if only we had the camera rolling. Like, I remember when we made Hello Panda, the short that Sara was in the background of, Steve would come up with ideas on the rehearsal and follow them through, and you'd be like, yeah, that, brilliant, do that. And then you'd never be able to nail it again. Adrian Edmondson, likewise, he loves an audience, and absolutely
plays so well to an audience.
Yeah. And so, you'd be sat there going, okay, this is just wonderful watching him do it. And sometimes it's like, I just wish we could just do that straight on camera, and then Clint Eastwood style be like, yeah, we're moving on. We've already done it. Thank you very much. Because he's
To be fair, in Out of Her Mind, there are a couple like that where we did just move straight on because we were so pressed for time that we had no alternative. But the other thing about it is also the difference in editing, which was something that definitely holds. I think it's interesting that we went from comedy into making what turned out to be a horror movie. That we didn't expect that at the time, but I think there's a shared kind of tension in the audience that you want to create with both. And again, there's a very definite thing of often a take will be amazing in the room, and even then when you watch it back, that take is brilliant, and then you start editing it and you start cutting it in the way you expect, and you watch it back and you're like, why is this not, this was magical a moment ago, and now I've worked on it, I've killed it. That's what's happened. I have come in here and I have ruined it. And there's something about that tension of what happens in a take And sometimes when you look at a scene, you go, no, okay, this is great. It's kind of like the individual bits of this weren't hysterically funny, but we can glue that together, and the timing of the edit will make that become much, much funnier than it felt like at the moment. And then other things you go kind of like, no, this we can't cut. We don't want to be cutting this. And I think we've got, again, much better at sensing those moments of kind of like, okay, we don't want to give ourselves any chance to cut this. Like this, we're going to shoot in one take, and it has to be one take, and this is how it's going to be. And that is actually going to be intrinsic to kind of creating the comedy in it.
Yeah. When you're sitting in the edit, different producers that you're working with have different ideas of how to, know that the thing is still funny by the time you're getting towards the end. So there's a wonderful producer that we work with called Spencer Millman, who genuinely laughs at the jokes that he finds funny as if it's the first time he's heard it, even though it's
He cannot help himself.
I love it.
It is such an astonishing gift for a comedy producer. Every time he found it funny when he thought of it. He's now seen it 6,000 times. Every time you go, it's still funny, and it is because it's so easy to lose that. Like normal people lose that, and it's so wonderful to have him in the edit. And you go kind of like, okay, that's still funny. That's still funny. We haven't killed that one. Yeah.
Whereas on the other end of the scale, we were editors on one particular show with a producer who basically definitely got to the point where it's like, okay, well, I've seen this too many times. I don't know whether it's funny or not. What we should do is we'll watch it through one more time, and every time that there's something that I think people will laugh at, I will say, laugh.
Oh, no.
And we'll count them up. And literally, we watched it entirely stony-faced. Just going, laugh. Laugh.
And again,
good half hour.
To be fair,
It was funny.
It was funny, and it was a huge hit. So everyone has their method,
Oh my goodness, I love it. And what do you think are some of the benefits or challenges of working as a pair?
Well, no one wants to pay you two wages. That's
I did wonder about that.
That's a definite downside. Yeah. So normally we manage to, when it's as editing is actually a bit easier because editors normally come kind of mob-handed anyway. So we usually kind of go, well, look, pay us an editor rate and a assistant editor rate, and we'll kind of sort it out between us. But yeah, with directing, we've sort of usually had to kind of, we individually take less money than everyone else in the industry does, but it's all right.
Yeah, but the benefit is actually as much that thing of the thing that's most enjoyable, which is always having somebody else's input and always trying to help them do that thing better. So most of the thing that we enjoy most is with loads of other people doing that, but it's born of the fact that we always used to, we've always done that with each other. Like,
and when you're sharing the job title, like you sort of have to do it. It's like if you're both there, with people looking at you, and it's kind of like, oh, you're both directing, and one of you has an idea, the other one can't go, no, I'm the director, we're not doing that. So well, he's also the director, so we have to at least open that idea up and explore what's good about it and what's terrible about it. And once you get into that habit, you sort of, as Chris says, you then that then becomes much easier to do with everyone else's ideas. And I think that can, again, actually, like often we've worked with producers who actually are a bit challenged by the fact that either they're used to their ideas being accepted or rejected. And rather than that, we kind of naturally go, I like this bit of it, or I don't understand, explain it more. Like get involved in roll your sleeves up and get dirty in this process. It's kind of like, let's try this in the edit. How does this work? And some absolutely adore that. And some it takes a while because I think they're just so used to kind of like, no, I've given you my note, I'm leaving now. But it's more fun when you get involved. Sorry, Chris, I interrupted you.
No, not at all. The bit that I always enjoy is whenever we're watching an edit and Ben's cutting the stuff that you're like, why have you used these takes? This doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And every single time Ben goes like, oh, it's that bit, and just in the frame over there. And I'm like, I never looked at that. And no one will ever look at that. And then you go, well, okay, how do I actually make it so that everyone's going to look at that? The bit that he's definitely pointing out that you go, that's going to make that really funny, that's going to make that really amazing, and then it's just a wonderful journey to figure out how to get people's eyes where he wants them to be. And yeah, I love doing that, you know, and it's
I'm something of an imperfectionist. It's kind of like there's the things that we know that we want, and then something will go wrong, and it's kind of like, oh, that's what I want now. Yeah, I want the bit that went wrong. Chris, can we have the bit that went wrong? How do we keep the mistakes in?
Yeah, I mean, editing in large part is the best edits always feel like you intended them, and in most cases you never did. And sure, there's the plan that you had, but there's the thing that it's come out at, and the thing that it comes out at, as long as it feels like, yeah, I did mean to do that in the first place, even though, you know, I have cut out 75% of the lines, and the ones that are there are all in a completely different order. As long as it feels like, yeah, no, that's exactly what we meant, then great, it works, you know, and you feel like you're in capable hands when you're watching something like that. So yeah, trying to figure out how to make those mistakes feel intended is great.
Yeah, I think that very much is one of the strengths of our kind of very kind of rogue background, making random shit, because, you know, we're very used to kind of scrapping our way through a shoot, you know, because we've got no time and no money, and so you kind of make that kind of creates there are two essentials to working in that way. One is that you have to plan everything down to the last possible kind of like, right, this is what we need. Why do we need it? This is why we need that. If we don't get it, this is, you know, like you've got to be completely focused. And then when all of that nevertheless goes wrong anyway, you then have to kind of get really good at embracing the mistakes and not being scared of mistakes and not being thrown by them and not being kind of like, oh, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, it's all ruined. And kind of like the more that we've kind of, you know, when you start out and you're kind of, you know, you're just working with your mates, that feels like the limitation of working with your mates. And then, you know, as you get so further down the line and you go kind of like, oh, actually, no matter how much budget you get given, it's always less than you actually need to do the thing that people are asking you to do. And you are always in the situation where it's kind of like, here are all the vans, here's all the everything, but still we actually need to get this shot in the next 20 minutes and we need 2 hours. Okay.
Yeah. Even Titanic, you know, the ship wasn't a full-size Titanic. He wasn't allowed that.
No.
That's perfect. And what have you developed to stop you from bringing that sense of pressure in a way that's not helpful? Because, for example, the trailer for Out of Her Mind, like, really takes its time in terms of the shot and the way that the tension's filled. So I'm just trying to think, are there things that you have to do purposefully, or is it just that you're so seasoned now that you know how to keep that time rush and pressure out of the places where it shouldn't be?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that is, I think a lot of that actually is our glee. You know, I think that kind of on set, we have a very clear enjoyment of those things. And it's very clear kind of, you know, okay, this is like everything gets pressured. You know, everything is kind of like, can we do this quicker? Can we not bother with this? And I think kind of our delight in, you know, like that, you know, that bit that you're talking about is kind of like our delight in extending jokes and kind of dragging things out till it's painful. I think that kind of communicates to everyone else, and then they know kind of like, okay, this is the fun bit. Let's not ruin this.
Yeah, I absolutely love not calling cut.
Yeah.
Oh, do you?
It's the best bit. It's the best bit where you're just like, okay, we're just going to keep that going. And sometimes people come up with genius bits at the end after, you know, the scene's meant to have ended. A lot of the time they do eventually turn to you and just like, what the hell are you doing? But you're kind of like, you know, yeah, it helps if you are, yeah, you're trying to be a bit playful rather than, you know, smack bang, okay, just keep moving.
Yeah, I think one of the key relationships to making that work is actually with the first AD, and I think that was kind of one of the sort of key learning moments earlier on in our career was kind of not really knowing what a first AD was, and then meeting and working with kind of standard TV first ADs who, you know, are some of the worst people on earth, and who, you know, like that because like it always makes me laugh that the term is assistant director, because if you get the wrong first AD who's not in sync with you as a director, then they are not your assistant. They are your worst enemy, and they are your biggest creative obstacle. And they seem to be there purely sort of on the producer's behest to spoil everything and stop you having fun and stop you getting the thing that you wanted. And it's this process of going kind of like, have they said the words? Was the camera rolling at that time? Brilliant, move on, because we've got to crack through this so quickly. And then when you kind of either meet the first AD who you kind of really connect with and who understands you, or kind of sometimes you have to go through that process, you know, and you have to really kind of fight those battles and, you know, come together as a team and go kind of like, you know, and work through it, kind of like look and explain like, this is what we're after. This is the thing that we really are trying to get hold of. So don't stamp on that. You can stamp on, you know, here are the things that you can hurry us up on. Here are the things that are indulgent, and call us on those things. But this element is what this show is. So don't cancel that. And it's kind of like, if you can actually have those conversations constructively and, you know, not calling them the worst people in the world, you know, things like that, then you end up kind of building that kind of relationship that you need. And then they do become your assistant, and they become your ally, and they become kind of, you know, that person who is there kind of going, okay, I know that this take's going to run and don't spoil it, you know, and they kind of, you know, get in on the joke. But that's not, I don't think that's anyone's first instinct, you know.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you think of, like, it sounds like you've done so much that you've figured out yourselves, and really practically, and from like a really early stage in your career, which is wonderful. Like, you've used words like rogue, and it sounds like you've got this lovely gleeful way of working. So when you think about like outward sources that have contributed to that aren't from within the pair of you, what kind of comedy creators or trainings or professionals or people do you think have influenced you in helpful ways, particularly when it comes to comedy?
Influenced us in helpful ways is interesting. I can think of people who've influenced us in unhelpful ways.
Yeah, you can do that as well. I just don't know. Maybe we shouldn't name check them, but
no, I mean, I suppose it's because like I think we're quite like, you know, like we both have a love of Terry Gillingham, and I think that he's a really bad influence in that sense, because it's kind of like he absolutely just makes hell for himself and sometimes gets away with it. And that's just the worst lesson that you can ever learn. Like, the worst thing you can do is to watch something like The Hamster Factor, the making of documentary behind 12 Monkeys, and just be kind of like, oh wow, that looks really chaotic, really difficult, and really good fun. Let's try and work in that way, because it's just not good lessons to learn. You know, it's like, similarly, we just before, like 6 months, I guess, before we shot our feature film Nina Forever, we watched, and this is not a comedy, except it is for us. But yeah, we watched
Once Upon a Time in Anatolia,
which is a sublime, difficult, long film.
When you're watching it, you're just basically like, oh my God, this is going to go on forever. What is this about?
And then it does.
Okay.
And like, there's this incredible sequence in it where the main character, it's set in Turkey, and the main character is this kind of like a sort of, you know, crumbling detective guy. And this kind of petty criminal has come to him and says that he knows where there's a body. And basically the first kind of 2 hours of the movie is him driving around Turkey at night, looking for this body that no one is sure is even there. And it's kind of like, it's already gone on for about an hour at this point, and he gets out of the car, and the headlights of the car are over here, and they're kind of like, everyone's looking in this direction, and the camera like leaves them, and the camera finds an apple tree, and an apple falls off the tree into a stream, and the camera follows this apple down the stream, and it goes and it goes, it goes some more,
and then it gets stuck. It gets stuck in the water.
Oh no!
And you're like, oh, and then it moves, and then it goes some more, and then it goes out of the frame, and it ends, and it means absolutely fucking nothing, and you're sat there all the way through this shot being kind of like, oh, they're going to find the body, it's going to be the no, what, and it absolutely, the kind of the gleeful stubbornness of that sort of filmmaking absolutely entranced and delighted us, and we very stupidly attempted to copy that when we made our first feature film, and that is why the first cut of that movie was over 3 hours and the final cut is 90 minutes.
Yeah.
It's a lot of takes that we let run and run and run, and it was a good lesson, because it's kind of like, sometimes that is really powerful for comedy, sometimes that's really powerful for drama, sometimes it's vacuous and empty. It's good to learn these lessons.
Yeah. In terms of very long performance, still one of my main regrets in our editing career is Kevin Eldon in a show called The Bleak Old Shop of Stuff, and another waterside scene, this one, where somebody has fallen into the docks, and he runs up to the docks and starts shouting, "No!" And Kevin Eldon can do, recycling his breath.
Yeah, cycling breathing,
cycling breathing. And literally that goes on for, I think it was, no word of a lie, 2 minutes long.
Yeah.
And it
amazing.
Incredibly funny, because it starts out and you're like, okay, that's really funny, and then it stops being funny, and then it's still going, and then it gets funny again, and then it stops being funny, and then it gets even funnier because it's still bloody going. And it was meant to be the last shot of the show, and you're kind of like, well, obviously, for a half-hour show to just be 2 minutes on something that's literally meant to be just a 5-second shot, if that, was impossible for us to be able to put into the edit, which was always such a shame, because it genuinely the funniest thing.
And again, classically, as soon as we started kind of cutting that and making it, cut to this shot and cut to this shot, it just wasn't funny. It's kind of like, run that across 3 shots and it's long. It's just long. It's like, it's only when it's the single shot for 2 minutes, that's when it becomes hysterically funny. It's kind of anything else is just suddenly indulgent.
Yeah. And on the comedy front, we've always loved working with a director called Ben Gosling-Fuller as editors, who has a really great knack for doing really interesting blocking in a really short space of time with the actors. We did a series with him called Marley's Ghosts, where some of the stuff that he came up with on the fly was just like, oh, wow, that was really impressive just to see. And you're kind of like, as an editor, you're sat there going like, well, I don't need to edit anything because you've done it all in camera. And yeah, it's always beautiful to see when you're able to do that. And it's not just about, oh, we've got to move the camera and the camera's doing something, special. It's actually like, no, it's about getting the actors where you want them to be so that it all becomes different shot sizes all in one go. And that's definitely something that we've always tried to be getting better at. We're ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, with Bleak Old Shop of Stuff, I tried to find a short way of saying that and failed completely. That was him, and produced by Gareth Edwards, wasn't it? Yeah. And again, that was a real kind of comedy masterclass, working with those two as editors, and kind of like, sort of coming into that as an editor feeling very kind of like, oh, this is how I want to cut this scene. And then Gareth would very kind of calmly and patiently just kind of go, no, cut here, show that, then it's funny. And you'd be kind of like, fucking, oh yeah, that's how that's funny. I see. Yeah. And
a lot of the time the comedy edit is one where you're not allowed to cut before the end of the line. You have to wait until somebody has said it and then you go to the reaction, because then it's going to be funny. Whereas if you go to the reaction before the thing's finished being said,
that's drama.
That's a drama cut. That was one of Gareth's big lessons for us.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Oh, I've only got time for one more question before we wrap up. So I'd love to know, you talked in terms of your process about like planning massively and then also just having to improvise and create massively because it doesn't work out as planned. So when you look at we're in 2023 now, so the rest of 2023, 2024, moving on, and you think about what you want to do next, how much are you able to plan and control projects versus not an easy question, versus do your ideal projects versus what comes in? Like, what's that blend looking like for you right now?
It's exactly the same. You have no choice but to plan. Like, you can't help but plan. You'd be stupid not to plan. But yeah, and then you hand those plans up to a God I don't believe in, and God goes, well, you don't believe in me, do you? So screw you, mate.
And then somebody else phones you up and says, do you want to do this? And you're like, yeah, right. So
yes, please.
yeah, we just love making stuff and with all sorts of different people and in all sorts of different ways. So we're just really keen to be making as much stuff as possible, really.
Again, we started out, as we said, kind of as filmmakers, and between us we would come up with an idea and then we would go and make it, and it would very much be our thing. And I think it's really nice to be at a stage now where kind of the projects that we're working on, some of them are that still. We have scripts that we've kind of poured sweat and blood and tears into and are very proud of, and they feel kind of good to go, depending if there's an industry to make them. And then kind of like we're sort of picking up, sort of jumping on board other people's projects, and that can be coming on board as direct, finding a script that we love and kind of going, well, we'd love to help you make that better and then direct it. Or kind of, or finding directors that we think would be good for our work, and also, just working in all the other things, doing editing, doing VFX in Chris's case, it's like we just like making stuff, really.
Wonderful. And where should people go to find out more about you and your work?
Well, the simplest place is blainebrothers.com. That's right, isn't it, Chris?
No, Ben. blainebrothers.co.uk.
Amazing.
blainebrothers.com. You will go and you'll be going to a haulage company in Minnesota.
No, don't do that.
That's not actually us.
That is
we're
definitely
not
where you should go.
To the Blaine Brothers trucking.
Definitely.
Watching.
For all of your Minnesotan haulage needs.
Yeah. blainebrothers.co.uk. That's us. Yeah.
Perfect. Wonderful. And I'll put that in the show notes to direct people to you, not the haulage. Awesome.
Definitely.
Thanks so much for your time, both of you.
Hey, thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.